Hello, 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 and welcome to this edition of the Jolly Heretic. I hope that you are all flourishing aggressively and have had a last, however long it is since we've last seen each other, 4 days or whatever it is, which you have been flourishing aggressively and enjoying life. Some of you may know about my antics of recent days, but there you go. So hello, everybody, and I hope you are all well and so on. Now, I did promise on this show that hello, Dick Bowen, hello, the Irish Contrarian, hello, Louis Bloom, hello, Carlotta. Hello, Carlotta here, our beautiful Spanish keeper of order here at the Jolly Heretic, is here to keep order and make sure that the chat is of a sufficiently intellectual standard. Good evening, No Name. Good evening, O Mercado. I won't try and pronounce the first name because that would be too complicated and difficult. And hello, Yehuda Finkelstein. Hello, sir. You're catching me live. Ed will try and fail to share his screen again. Yes, I'm afraid that. Well, thank you, Elijah Woods. Yes, I think that is a bit of a problem, sir. I don't know how when I had Dr. McCulloch on here the other week, he managed to share his screen successfully. I'm not sure how he managed to do that, but I look. Anyway, cheers, everybody. Cheers. I hope you've all got your drinks in hand. Cheers. Cheers, Adam Leshevic and Anthony Gall and all those watching. Cheers, cheers, cheers. Now, I have a lot of questions to go through because I haven't done them for a while, and I promised I would do so. And so, ciao, Orthodox Belarusian opinions. So I thought it would be a good idea to simply get on with it. Now, I had one very interesting question last week from Brian in the Sewer. £20. Thank you very much indeed. That's very kind of you. And he says, could you please elaborate deeply on how based the Zoomer generation is, our evolution towards more conservatism, when this change will occur towards becoming more conservative, and this type of thing? I am simply dying to know. Well, as I may have mentioned, I can't remember whether I mentioned it, but as I may have mentioned last week, I am currently working with a fellow, with a drinker at the Jolly Heretic, with our squire, actually, on this subject, in order to try and get some sort of a purchase, some sort of proper time frame as to when this sort of thing might happen. And I've been working on a book on the matter, but certainly we do know that analysis of Britain's large-scale YouGov poll conducted by Eric Kaufman, what you'll find is that as a rule, the younger people are, the more liberal they tend to be, and they become more conservative with age. However, this is not the case with those who were 18 when they were interviewed in 2020. That cohort was as liberal as people who were 40 years old. Now, that's strange. Something's going on because that's not what's supposed to happen. Conservatism increases with age because people become more conscientious, that is, rule following, high impulse control, less open to new experiences, and less tolerant of ambiguity as they increase with age. And so they become decreasingly liberal with age. And so what you would expect is that 18-year-olds would be very, very, very liberal indeed, and they would maybe become a little bit more liberal when they're in up to their mid-20s, and then it would start to go down. But this is not what's happening. According to YouGov, identification as right-wing has fallen from 27% among, goes down to 27% among 26-year-olds, and then rises to 40% among 40-year-olds. But it is also 40% among 18-year-olds. And this can't be because they haven't been to university yet, a process which might inculcate them with liberal ideas. This is because the data finds that the age of peak liberal identification is actually becoming older. So when you compare different YouGov surveys conducted in different years, it's becoming older. So what this would be consistent with is a shift whereby younger people, very younger people, the so-called Zoomers, are becoming increasingly right-wing. And there are other markers of that as well. Further consistent with this, people born in the mid-1990s onwards, they lose their virginity later, which they leave home later. They start dating later. They are less sexually promiscuous. Now, if it was just a sort of a herbivore man thing that they don't want to have any sex at all, then that would be a different issue. But no, they are less sexually promiscuous. They do have slightly less sex, but they are less sexually promiscuous as well. So this is all consistent with them slowing down. Jennifer Tweng has looked at this in a book that she's done on the General Social Survey. So they're slowing down. There's some evidence that they seem to be more conservative. Now, what we're doing in this, and also there was a study that was done on British data, which found that we've reached peak tolerance for homosexuality, and now we are becoming less tolerant. I'll just see if I can find it. We are becoming less tolerant of homosexuality. Yes, since 2015, the percentage of British people who according to the British Social Attitudes Survey, who believe that premarital sex is mostly or always wrong, fell from 30% in 1983 to 10% in 2007, has hardly moved since then, and has fractionally risen. Those believing homosexuality is mostly or always wrong was 70% in 1985, 30% in 2010, and now appears to have plateaued, and between 2015 and 2018 rose slightly, but actually went up. So what this is consistent with potentially is that people are becoming slightly more conservative. Now, the heritability of this is extremely high, of course. The heritability of how conservative you are, it's about 0.7 heritable. And so if there were genetic factors involved, that's what we'd be seeing. But as I say, there's no point going into it yet. I shall be having a conversation with our squire on Wednesday when we'll look at some of the amazing, jolly, clever computer. Could be due to immigration, sir, that is true. It could be due to a higher Muslim percentage of the population. But what that wouldn't be consistent with what we're finding as well in terms of the breeding, which is that they tend to breed more. These people who are white and are right wing tend to breed more. So that would be consistent with some sort of genetic change which would be occurring in the population, and that genetic change would eventually result in a change in a sort of tipping point that would be reached. And once that tipping point would be reached, then you would expect things to change back in a more conservative direction. So I mean, I think that's quite possible. As I say, I can't go into too much depth, sir, because it's something that I am researching at the moment, and therefore, and consequently, and remember, you have to take a every time I say consequently. So cheers. And consequently, it's not something I can be so sure about yet. But I will keep you abreast of developments in that department. You can be sure of that. Hello, Celia. Hello, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. Oh, I haven't signed into the thingy, have I? Oh, silly me. I just have to sign into just signing into the entropy now. I just have to turn the mic off quickly. Right. No feedback. No feedback. Good. Okay, I've signed into the entropy. So if you would like to send donations, you can do or super chats, which I will of course try and deal with today. And if I don't get them out to them today, I will of course get them out to them on the next episode or the after that. Then you can do so at the link below on entropy, which I prefer because that means that they take less off and they're nice people and they're not bad people, the entropy people. Or you can do so through the old YouTube. But anyway, I hope that answers that answers the question as much as I can, sir. Okay, I can't go into more detail on that, but there is some evidence that this change is happening. At the moment, it's slow, and based on our modelling, it will increase in the future. Okay, now, Fasim Al-Qassam, $10, thank you, sir, says, Ed, can you give us a quick rundown on smoking jackets? I quite like the English, and I think it would be novel to buy one, considering that I smoke like a chimney. Any advice on where to buy one? Well, the other one that I have, the one that's sort of orange and red, I inherited that from my grandfather. Quite honestly, I would imagine, well, I can check actually. It might actually say, just a sec. He didn't actually smoke. Of course, the smoking jacket became divorced from smoking. But maybe it says on the tag where this was from. Oh, I've cut, the tag appears to have been cut. I'm so sorry. If only that wasn't cut. Something large. No, I can't see, I'm afraid. But anyway, the history of the smoking jacket is that smoking, of course, became fashionable from the sort of very, very late 16th century, early 17th century onwards. And it started off as something that was fashionable among the sort of upper classes. Thank you, sir. And from then on, of course, it started to spread. But clothing was very expensive in those days, of course, and people didn't want to get ash on their clothes and so on, and so they would wear a special jacket when they smoked in order to protect their clothing from ash and from smoke and whatever. And that was where the smoking jacket really started. So if we like, we could call it sort of proto-smoking jacket was already knocking around by the mid-1600s. And indeed, Samuel Pepys in his diary seems to refer to something like a smoking jacket. So that's how it started, to protect your clothes. Then it became particularly fashionable from the 1850s onwards, when we started to get the rise of cigars. because of course then you've got a big problem with ash, and so people would have these jackets which would protect their clothes, and they would go to a special room in the house, the smoking room, where they would smoke, and they would wear their smoking jacket. And so and then after that, after the 1850s, it gradually starts to become a fashion item. So you wear a smoking jacket when you're just inside the house, and it's a short jacket like the one I'm wearing, no tails, a short jacket. Before that, of course, jackets always had tails because men tended to wear them outside when riding horses and whatever, and so they had to have tails. But these jackets did not have tails, no tails, just a short jacket to wear indoors. And so it became something that you would wear indoors in the house as a sort of fashion item, and they became more and more ornate and expensive and that sort of thing. And by the 1880s, they're a very, very common thing. Now they then develop, of course, into the jacket that you would wear not when you're smoking, or that you would wear at a dinner party or something, where there is no tails, i.e. the tuxedo. And interestingly, in Finnish, the word for tuxedo is smokki. Why? Well, it's a loan word, and it comes from the smoking jacket, because that's where it came from. You started to wear a smokki, a smoking jacket, on formal occasions, and so that's where the tailless jacket has developed from. And then after that, it sort of went out of fashion from, I suppose, the sort of 50s or 60s onwards. And Hugh Hefner is, of course, associated with the smoking jacket, but it went out of fashion from then onwards. And then and now it's sort of just a sort of an unusual thing to wear. Really, I don't really have a proper one. The one I've got is this thin item, because where I live in Finland, it's very difficult to get hold of them, so I'd have to go to England to get one, and even then they're quite difficult to get hold of. You can buy them online and whatever, but the problem with buying them online is, well, are they going to fit? You have to mess around sending them back and whatever. So I always think it's safer if I buy clothes to buy them in person. So with this one I bought online, but it didn't cost very much money, so it wasn't really that much of a risk. But in general, if you get a proper one, a proper sort of thicker quilted one, it's very expensive. I was watching, interestingly, the episode of Bottom the other day, where they decided that the TV's broken and they decide to do hobbies and things like that. And Richie, they play chess, and Richie decides that he should wear a smoking jacket, and so he puts his raincoat inside out. And they say, "Why have you got your raincoat inside out?" He goes, "No, I have not. It's a smoking jacket." But it was sort of padded, quilted looking, and that's what a lot of the more expensive ones look like. They're sort of quilted looking, so not like this. So yes, that's the brief history of where smoking jackets came from, sir. So I hope that is satisfactory, and thank you for your support. Robin Kale says, "Hey Ed, do you believe in Madison Grant's theory of there being a Nordic elite in Greece, Rome, Persia, and India that led to high civilization?" No, I don't think that's not, as far as I'm aware, that's not consistent with the evidence, I'm afraid. The evidence is that the ancient Greeks were very similar to the Greeks of today. The ancient Romans were relatively similar to the Romans of today. The ancient Persians were relatively similar to the Persians of today. In fact, there have been DNA analyses that have been done of high status, known high status people who, clearly from how they're buried or what they're buried with or whatever, that we know were high status people. And those people have the genetics of Greece, of Rome, of Persia, and whatever. It is certainly true that with India, the higher castes tend to be lighter. That is true, and in that sense, one could argue that they are genetically closer to Europeans. That may well be the case. So the higher castes tend to be lighter, higher up people are lighter, and there is this historical idea of the Aryans and the Indo-Europeans, and how the Indo-Europeans came from Eastern Europe, basically, and colonized northern India. So that there may well be some truth in that. But I certainly wouldn't concur that there is a Nordic strain that is responsible for these people. No, so I don't think that theory, as far as I'm aware, is not in line with the evidence. The based embodiment says, "Would you make a video on Japan, on their low birth rate, their prawn obsession?" I think it might be porn, as well as how come their intelligence and extreme slow, I think you mean, life strategists cause them to be so maladaptive. I have written an article about this. It hasn't been published yet, but I've written an article about it. And my theory is that because they are extremely slow life history strategists, they are very, 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 very sensitive to their environment. Because if you are very sensitive, people who are slow life history strategists are very evolved to a very, very specific niche, whereas people that are fast life history strategists are sort of generalists. They're less evolved to a very, very specific niche. And so this means that they if that niche changes, then they will experience an evolutionary mismatch, and they will experience an evolutionary mismatch far more easily and with far less change from the environment to which they are adapted than would be the case with a person that was more of a faster life history strategist. And so what you would expect is that the deviation from the pre-Darwinian norm in Japan would not have to be particularly large compared to what it would have to be among European people to really mess them up and mess up and make them completely maladapted, rather like the mice in Mouse Utopia. And I think that's what we're seeing in Japan, that in Japan, even though they don't have immigration really, they're all Japanese, it's still a highly traditional, conservative and patriarchal society compared to the West, because they are so much more conservative, because they are slower life history strategists and whatever, and they're more conformist, and there's high levels of social trust and all that, even though it is much, much more in line in all of those ways with what life was like under harsher Darwinian conditions to which they are evolved. Even though that's the case, they are still more messed up in terms of how quickly their population is collapsing, in terms of them not wanting sex, in terms of these spiteful, manifestly spiteful mutants, these herbivore men, and to a lesser extent their female equivalent, in terms of all of the maladaptive ways they choose to live and whatever. And so they now have to have special sort of semi-government organized parties to force Japanese people, because they're so shy of the opposite sex, to get to know each other. All of these these virgins living at home into their 30s and all of this stuff. And as you say, all of the bizarre porn they're into as well, all of the peculiar things they're into, it seems to me to be consistent with them being much, much more maladapted as a consequence of a much, much smaller deviation from a much, much lesser evolutionary mismatch, whereas we are less maladapted than them, despite the fact that our evolutionary mismatch is far more substantial. And so I think that is absolutely fascinating. I don't know if I'd like to do a video on it, in the sense that I haven't been to Japan. And before I were to do a video on something like that, I'd like to go there. You know, I feel I'm qualified to do a video on India. I've done a couple of videos in India. I've been to India. I've seen it firsthand. I feel I'm qualified to do videos to some extent on countries that I've been to, but I haven't been to Japan. And I think I'd really like to go to Japan and see it firsthand before I can do a video on it. So that's my feelings on that. Ed, what are those gene forms for creativity? Want to search my genome. It was the 5-HTTRL or something like that. That was the name of. I should emphasize these are only candidate genes. I mean, there's not 100% proof that these are associated with creativity, but it is a certain specific gene form. Let me just find it. Hang on a minute. Kura Dutton comprehensive Dutton comprehensive psychology. Sorry, let me just find it. Here we go. Okay, should be finding it now. Okay, yes. Why do Northeast Asians win so few Nobel Prizes? So here we go. It should be coming up in a second. So it is the candidate genes were inquisitiveness were DR-D47 repeat, and 5-HTTLPR long form, and MU opioid receptor gene OPRM1G allele. And we present evidence in this paper. I will put well, there's no point putting a link to it in the chat, is there, unless you're actually watching now. I'll put a link to it on the screen, or I'll put a link to the paper on the screen. The paper on the screen. Why do Northeast Asians win so few Nobel Prizes? So if you put that into if you DuckDuckGo that particular paper, then you will find that, and you will find the information that you require. So here we go. So this is the paper you want. So that's the one that you should, there you go, have a look at. And it will. I've just read them out for you, of course, but it will tell you what you need to know. Okay, so I hope that is helpful. Righto. I'm sorry. I'm just going to find the old thing and put it back in the old thing there. So I hope that is useful. So yeah, there is some evidence that they are associated with creativity and with creative achievement, but I should emphasize that with these kinds of things, it's quite weak. I mean, it's not, it's quite weak evidence. These are merely candidate genes, but nevertheless, there is some evidence that was the case. And fascinatingly, we found that the population prevalence of these genes varies in a very interesting way, which is that it's relatively high among Europeans, it is relatively low among Northeast Asians, and Finns, who are, of course, sometimes stereotyped as being a bit sort of Northeast Asian and certainly as uncreative, are in between the two, which I thought was extremely interesting. So I thought it was absolutely fascinating, that. Okay, Simodo says £1. Thank you, sir. Hollow 1916 says, can I expect your paper to be all the differences on taint length? Oh, I think I read that one. Yes, the taint length issue last week. Those that weren't here last week, of course, we know that the taint, the anogenital distance, correlates with how masculinized you are and how much testosterone you have. And men tend to have a longer anogenital distance than females, and more masculinized people of either sex have a longer anogenital distance. This is, of course, known as the taint or the Humber Bridge or the Bass or whatever. And we looked at this in the last episode. So the more manly you are, the longer will be the distance between your anus and your scrotum, and the more feminine you are, the shorter will be your distance between your anus and your vaginal vestibule. Someone's saying in the chat they tried to measure theirs, but they were too drunk. Well, never mind. You can always the Irish contrarian is saying that you can always there's something to look into. Says Diverted Flight. Precisely, it's certainly worth thinking about. It was a fascinating relationship. Okay, Bertha says thanks for the convo. I've read that up before. Callowin Court says the capitalist system makes it impossible to support a family on 1 or 2 incomes, at which point the sheep are told abortion and contraception is essential. Well, I don't know about that. I think where I live, I think it would be possible to support a family on 1 income, but it's just that you would have to forego certain luxuries, such as expensive holidays abroad or whatever. And people don't want to forego those luxuries, and so therefore they have to have 2 incomes. I know this in Finland. I know one person who is a religious fellow, and he works, and his wife is a housewife. And in terms of getting a mortgage at the bank, they don't like that. They don't like 1 income, even though he may earn quite a lot of money, even though he may more than make up for the fact that there's only 1 income. They don't seem to like 1 income. They want it's sort of with Finnish people, it's sort of built into them. No, everyone has to be the same. The difference is bad, and there should be 2 incomes. And they really seem to dislike this idea of 1 income. But I think it probably is possible to survive on 1 income. As I said, it's just that the standard of living you will be able to achieve will obviously be much lower than it otherwise would be, and you won't be able to sort of keep up appearances to the same extent. So that's something of a problem. So yeah. So the next question comes from New Vision 2010, and he says top arguments for the existence of significant genetic differences between populations is limits of possibility of organ transplants and what more. Well, I don't know if I answered this one, but the simple fact that when you do analysis of genetics and you do cluster analysis, then they cluster quite separately. So that's one thing. And there's loads of other differences that you could look at. I mean, it's incredible the number of differences you could look at on pretty much anything you can think of. There are differences in anything you could possibly conceive of. That's the nature of race. Charles Darwin commented that it would be an eternal study, Sisyphean task, to try and list out all the differences. I mean, there's differences in the nature of earwax. What's that got to do with social issues? There's differences in the nature of pretty much anything you could, of where you sweat. There's differences in of the body build. There's differences in anything you can think of. But in terms of something that you can sort of appeal to emotion with these idiot liberals that can't deal with logic and whatever, they are persuaded by emotion and power rather than logic, then the thing that will probably hit home with them is basically that if you deny the existence of race, then you will cause people to die because there won't be enough enough organs of certain races. Not just that, but medicines. Medicines work differentially in different races. Disease prevalence is different in different races. Clearly, the likelihood of surviving COVID-19 is different in different races, and that is the case even when you control for sociological factors. It's clearly different. It's clearly for genetic reasons that there are differences in the prevalence of catching and of death from COVID-19. So this shows you that you cannot possibly state that race is a social construct. And if you do that, it's extremely dangerous, because you are saying to some people, oh, you know, it's fine, you don't have to worry about this. And I'm afraid you do, and you have to worry more. South Asians, for example, are more likely to get diabetes. This means that the diet that they should pursue should not be a Western diet. They are not evolved to this sort of Western diet, and they're more likely to get diabetes if they eat it. So again, all of these things show you, of course, you're never going to get one solid difference that's different between races, but you have all these differences, and they're very, very significant differences, and they're clearly genetic, and they have important social consequences. So I think that is the answer you can give, sir. But as you know, my book Making Sense of Race will be out hopefully within the next couple of weeks, and then you will be able to get that, and you will be able to see in tremendous detail all of the differences that exist. And yes, if you would like to send a super chat, then you can do so, as someone is saying currently in the normal chat. You can do so at the link on the screen, or you can do so through here. Okay, the next question comes from done that one. My wife is currently drinking Wales's finest I Maiden t-shirt. Yes, I think I did that one from Perkin Flump. Lee Garfield did that one. Rowan Kale says, would people of third world countries survive the cold of Europe once the civilization collapses? The answer is obviously not. No. Once civilization collapses, then you are back under harsh Darwinian conditions. I mean, let's look at what happened under harsh Darwinian conditions. I was reading a very interesting book the other day called Albion Seed, and what it showed was that one of the reasons why slavery was unable to flourish in the northern states of America, it's not that they didn't want it. It's not that they were these lovely people in the northern states and they didn't want slavery. They couldn't really have slavery because the mortality rate among black people was so high, and among the slaves, it was much higher than the mortality rate of white people, because black people were not evolved to a cold and relatively dark environment of the kind that you have in the northern states, particularly in the winter in the northern states, and so they couldn't obtain enough sunlight enough ultraviolet light via their skin and produce enough vitamin D. They couldn't cope with the cold. They would freeze to death. They simply weren't able to survive the conditions of the northern states of the United States. And so slavery just wasn't an option for these people, because the blacks just couldn't survive. Their mortality rate was much higher than that of the whites. In the southern states, however, the opposite was the case. The mortality rate was the class, according to our Albion Seed, was higher among like white babies. Now, why is that the case? Well, because it's hotter, and black people are black people are evolved to the heat. They can cope with the heat. They don't get skin cancer. They are adapted to that kind of environment, and so they survive better. And so therefore slavery was able to flourish in the south of the United States, where it was hotter, to which black people were more evolved, and it wasn't able to flourish in the north of the United States when they're not, to which they're not evolved. And so you're seeing that process now to some extent, even now, with various differences in COVID-19, because black people are vitamin D deficient when they live in these kinds of countries, and this is one of the causes of the mortality rate of them being higher than among white people, because they're vitamin D deficient, because they're not adapted to live in the environment. They don't have white skin. So certainly if and when civilization, if it were to collapse back to pre-Darwinian levels, you'd have Darwinian levels of selection, and that would select for pale skin in an agricultural ecology in a dark place. That clearly would select for in an agricultural ecology, and it would select for dark skin. And that's another interesting point. With these kinds of conditions reimposed, it would be more difficult for white people living in hot places. That doesn't to say they wouldn't survive at all, but it would be more difficult for them to survive, because, and it doesn't say some people perhaps would survive, some of them would, but they would be disproportionately selected against. Thank you, hello DB, because they wouldn't be adapted to the environment in question. Okay, the next question comes from Wheelman Real Man. He says, everyone must reply to Trump tweets telling that he must use the military. I have no idea what is going on there. I'm going to be tomorrow, by the way. I'm going to be on a show with a chap called Toller, who has his own show. He's from this group of chaps called The Absolute State of Britain. And he's live streaming with me tomorrow night, and we'll perhaps be talking about that in more detail there. But I have no idea what's going on. On the one hand, it seems to me to make sense that if you politicize the vote and you say that if you're one of my supporters, then you should vote in person. And don't vote by post, then of course a lot of the people who are Republican are going to vote in person, and the people that are Democrats are more likely to be scared of Corona. You've politicized the voting, and so you'll vote by post because Trump tells you not to, or whatever. And so therefore you would expect the Democrats to overwhelmingly vote by post, and you would expect the Republicans to overwhelmingly vote in real life. And therefore you would expect there to be a massive surge in support for the Democrats once the postal votes are counted. And if they are counted after the normal votes are counted, then you would expect to see this huge surge. Now, that is at the same time, though, from what I've seen, from what they're saying, Giuliani or whatever are saying, there is evidence of huge levels of fraud, even though you would prognosticate some sort of movement in the direction that I just said. There is levels of huge evidence of apparently fraud. So I would be interested to see that. Now, of course, I appreciate that they can't go public with it. What the media say is, oh, show us your evidence, show us your precise evidence. But of course, they can't do that because there's going to be a court case over this, and you obviously don't show your opponents your hand before playing the game. It just makes it easier for them to undermine you. So no sensible lawyers would make public the evidence that they're going to present to the courts. They would describe that evidence as they are doing in the vaguest possible ways, and then they would take it to the courts. Of course, they're not going to go public and say this is exactly what our evidence is. That wouldn't make any sense. That would be stupid. So I'm very interested to see what it is that's going on. I wouldn't be at all surprised if there's widespread fraud. Why wouldn't there be in a society that is as utterly polarized as this, where one side thinks the other is evil, and to a lesser extent, even the right think the left is evil, where nobody trusts anybody else anymore, where the two sides are utterly polarized? Why wouldn't that? You would expect there to be mendacious activities of this kind, and there is evidence implying that there have been mendacious activities of this kind, and we shouldn't be particularly shocked by it, to be perfectly honest. And I think it's so ironic that having spent 60 or 70 years doing everything to undermine national unity, we know that multiculturalism and immigration undermines trust, even among the native population. We know that people trust people that are religious more, so you undermine religiosity and undermine a sense of shared morality, undermine that people tend to trust people that are more similar to them, and the marks of similarity will be shared belief, shared blood, shared perception of shared history, a perception of part of the shared tribe. You do everything you can to undermine these beliefs, to destroy these things, to deconstruct these things, to say these things aren't true, to turn us into a bunch of quite separate people that don't trust each other and don't feel bonded to each other, and then you feel surprised and therefore have no trust in anything, and no trust particularly in the government and so on, and then you expect these same people to not be skeptical about things like vaccinations or whether a pandemic is being misused, or about elections. Ideological subversion, as Big Hex says, precisely. Of course they're going to be skeptical about these things. Why wouldn't they be skeptical about these things? You've manufactured a situation of very low social trust over the last 70 years by allowing yourself to be manipulated by these spiteful mutants and their spiteful, wicked ideas that undermine cohesion, that undermine trust, that undermine positive and negative ethnocentrism, that undermine anything that makes society function and do well. You've spent 70 years doing that, undermine everything, trust, undermine even truth. You tell people that a woman is a man and a man is a woman, up black is white and up is down. You suppress information. You persecute those that tell the truth in terms of science or in terms of history or whatever it is. such that, of course, huge swathes of the population are not going to trust the government anymore because they know the government lies. They're not going to trust the media because they know the media lies. They're not going to trust the police. They're not going to trust, because you think all that sort of, as well. You go through those with a sort of march to the institutions to make them subject to these sorts of lies, and then you expect people are going to trust vaccinations, and they're going to trust election results, to be fair and square, and that when there's postal ballot. Of course, they're not going to do that. So what do you expect is going to happen? So I think that's absolutely silly. So of course, that is the situation that we're in. Right. The next question is from Ed. It's a £1. Thank you, sir. George, good show. Something about Hugh did that one. Dutton, you signed the draftsman's contract, didn't you? Says Cowling Court. I don't know what the draftsman's contract is, sir. I know there's a book. There was a movie, I think, called The Draftsman's Contract or something. There was a movie in the early 80s, and it was a sort of a drama set in the 1660s about a murder or something like that. So I perhaps that's what you have in mind. I haven't seen it. I had to put into a search engine what it was you were talking about. I hadn't actually heard of what you were talking about. So it looked quite interesting, actually. Yes, post-truth societies, as Orinoco went precisely, exactly. So I think that is. I'm not. I was at school with a chap whose dad was a draftsman. But I think they've all sort of died out now as due to the rise of computers and things like that. I mean, when I was at school, the amount of time we wasted doing technical drawing, and it's all turned out to be completely pointless, complete waste of time. I hadn't taught me anything I needed to know. I found it very boring at the time, and lo and behold, it has turned out to be completely unnecessary. Okay, the next question comes from Paddy62. And he says, why do people in poor, lower classes agree with and support the upper class elitists' arrogant politics, their loathing of the working classes, and their dystopian cultural misconceptions? Well, to say two things there. First of all, which kind of elite are we talking about? Because, I mean, if you're talking about America, you've donated in dollars. Charles Murray, in his book, Coming Apart, highlights two kinds of elite. There are the traditional elites that are sort of patriarchal and noblesse oblige and whatever. And they tend to have traditional views, traditional ethnocentric religious sort of views. And they share those views with the working class. And the middle class traditionally tend to deviate from that, because they want to distinguish themselves from the upper class and the working class. And the key way they do that is through their morality. But by stressing that, I'm more moral than you, I'm more educated. And this sets off a sort of moral and religious signaling, which distinguishes them from both the upper class and the working class. So why would the working class agree with the upper class? Well, it could be that it's adaptive in terms of a group that is held together in group selection, for there to be a class system. And it could be that the upper classes have maintained these sorts of values which they are inculcated with Darwinian sort of ideas and with ideas of the good of society and being group selected and whatever. The working class have been subject to Darwinian selection for longer than anybody else because they're poor, and also their lives are more stressful. And so they're more likely to be in touch with their sort of evolved based instincts, and they're less likely to be sort of mutated or whatever. So therefore they have they have this adaptive group centered view of the world in common with the upper classes, and the middle classes deviate from that because they're dysgenic, and because they inherently have, and because they tend to have these maladaptive values increasingly, and they certainly are individualistic. They're highly individualistic and do not have group-centered values. Their values involve stressing their own morality and how important they are as a means of battling both classes. So that's one reason why they would agree with them. If you're talking about why would the working class people agree with the other side of the elite, and that the more dominant elite now, the sort of woke leftist elite, well, I would say there probably are some working class people that are like that, and they would perhaps they would agree with it because they've been inculcated, because they have low IQ. Perhaps they would agree with it because they are insecure in their social class and they want to move upper class, and they perceive middle class people as believing these things, and so they persuade themselves that they believe these things as well. So it's a way of sort of being a cut above other working class people. Perhaps they correctly perceive that they might get a better social reaction if they believe these things, so they persuade themselves that they believe them. or perhaps they are simply manifestations of mutation and whatever within the working class, which is perfectly possible as well. So there's all kinds of reasons why that might be the case. Okay, the next question comes from Grant Johnson. He says, greetings to you and your family. Thank you very much, sir. The next question, $18 from Viva Yo. And he says, autism, psychopathy, and schizophrenia are variably mildly present in high-performance IQ people. How do these three relate to Ocean? That's the big five personality traits: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Male, female life strategy mean need to identify, breed, and raise stable bloodlines of such people with an environment that will nurture, extract these traits consistently, acclaim, and salute you. I'm not sure about that. No, there is an association between very high IQ, outlier high IQ, not normal range IQ, outlier high IQ and autism. There is an association between, to some extent, genius and psychopathic traits, as long as that is of an, it's normally sub-psychopathic traits though, rather than full-on psychopathic traits, and that's when it comes together with very, very high IQ indeed. I'm not aware of particularly consistent evidence that schizophrenia helps you out. Being schizotypal, when associated with very, very high IQ, has been argued to be associated with certain kinds of creative achievement, but I believe the evidence is disputed on that. So I'm not sure you can say they are mildly present in high IQ people. With schizophrenia, with or psychopathology. Autism, yes, that seems to be mildly present among very high IQ people. How do they relate to Ocean? Autism tends to be a manifestation of low agreeableness, so particularly the subset of agreeableness that is empathy. It's low empathy. And you could argue that low empathy helps you to solve problems. And this is what Simon Baron-Cohen argues with the male brain and the female brain. The autistic brain is totally focused on solving problems and doesn't allow anything else like emotion to interfere with this. And so you can see how autism, when combined with high intelligence, will give you an edge at solving problems. And also autism allows you to take in more information because you're hypersensitive to stimuli, and therefore you can better solve a problem that way. So it's low empathy. Psychopathology is low empathy plus often low impulse control as well. Extroversion, I'm not aware these things relate to. Schizophrenia has been argued to be an optimum, to be a placing on the schizotypal spectrum, and it's been argued that that's kind of what openness is. And if you're very, very, very high in a moderate level of openness is good and is associated with artistic success and things like that. And then you go into the realms of schizotypal and schizotypy and schizoid personality, and then at the other extreme, schizophrenia, and that's bad. So that's how they relate to Ocean. As for male and female life history strategy, as a rule, all of these things, I don't know about autism, but certainly psychopathology and schizophrenia are associated with fast life history strategy. Autism seemingly as well, and it's a male brain, it's testosterone. That's a fast life history sort of strategy. So that's how that works. As for male, female, women are lower in autism, they're lower in psychopathology, and they're lower in schizophrenia. However, schizophrenia is the one that's the most feminine, if you like, of the three. So it's more, like, for example, schizophrenics are much more likely to be right-handed than autistics are, because autistics are very high in testosterone, and being left-handed is, of course, a manifestation of testosterone in part. And so so that's what's going on there. As for identifying and breeding them, well, no, I'm not sure that really works, because what we'd be identified would be geniuses, and geniuses tend not to want to breed. We might want to ensure that their collateral relatives breed. That would be a jolly good idea, to make sure that the collateral relatives of geniuses breed. So identify the geniuses, who are probably not going to want to breed because they're geniuses, and identify their collateral relatives and make sure they breed. But then one of the problems with this, and the problem with sort of planning it, is that it tends to come about sort of naturally in history, that a certain optimum level of genius is good for the society. Too much and people are uncooperative and don't get on. Too little and they don't win battles of group selection because they don't have as many brilliant ideas. And working with somebody at the moment that's doing calculations using modeling and whatever, it seems to be extremely complicated. And my suspicion is that if you interfere with these things, then you may well simply make it worse. And so it's rather better to just let nature do its job, I'm afraid. And also, I would note that I do think it's quite possible that we can't get too intelligent, because if we get too intelligent, then we get, it seems we get too kind of autistic, which means we don't get on with each other. And also, if we get too intelligent, we seemingly reason away the desire to have children, at least under a certain level of luxury. And so this means that intelligence has to be allowed to collapse back down, because if we continue getting more intelligent forever, then we just stop breeding. So I think that I'm of the view, I'm quite pessimistic about this. I think that it has to go in cycles of people become more intelligent, less intelligent, more intelligent, less intelligent. And if it doesn't happen like that, if we just go on being more intelligent forever, then because that's not supposed to happen, there are downsides to very high intelligence. There's a level of intelligence that's good, but there's a downside. It's like saying animals should become stronger forever. No, if you were to make them stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger, there'd be eventually downsides to this. So I'm afraid that I think that there are downsides to this that could potentially balls things up severely. And so it's better to just let nature take its course. Civilization is going to collapse. It's going to go backwards. It's happened in the past. It's happened numerous times. And then people tend to religiousize the previous civilization. They tend to say, oh God, because they can't build tall buildings anymore, and they kind of are not educated, and they forget about what it was like. And then they start to believe, oh, giants must have built these buildings. You had that belief during the Greek Dark Ages. That's documented. You had the belief that the Minoans or whatever, they must have been giants. How else could they have built these things? I think that's where the common belief in giants comes from. And then once people were forgetting about Rome and kind of forgotten it, it was only dimly in the folk memory. Remember what their lives were like. They can't read. Everything's by word of mouth. Things get exaggerated and forgotten. Oh, giants must have built Bath. Or whatever. And I suspect we will go back possibly to a time within the next couple of 100 years, 500 years ago, that's what we'll think. We'll go, God, imagine these giants that lived in London and built the Gherkin. I mean, to the extent that they remain standing, these kinds of buildings, probably a lot of them will just fall down. And certainly the grass will take over. Okay, passer on the street. Hello, sir. That says, why do so many cultures practice male circumcision? I've actually done a video on this, sir. It's a BitChute exclusive, though. It's only on BitChute. I think the answer is that it's a way of gauging your commitment to the society. So it's a way, you're going to mutilate your child. This shows that you're highly committed to the society. And it's a way of ensuring in a position of battle that this person is one of us, because it's an absolute marker that you can be absolutely certain that he's one of us. You can change your clothes, you can do whatever, but you can't pretend a mutilation like that has happened when you are a child or whatever, or teenager, or whenever it's happened. And so it's a way of ensuring that someone's not lying to you and that they are from your group or not from your group. And that kind of identification is going to be crucial under conditions of intergroup conflict, because you want to kill the person that's not part of your group and you want to save the person that's part of it. And we know that exactly this operated during the partition of India. By this time, the Hindus and the Muslims hated each other, and you had Hindus moving from Muslim, what became Pakistan, into India, and you had Muslims moving from what became India, now modern India, into Pakistan. And you had gangs waiting for them, killing them, and they would literally, if they weren't sure if somebody was a Muslim or not, or was a Hindu or not, they would just pull their pants down and look at their willy, and they would be killed or not killed accordingly. So that's where it comes from. There is, of course, there was until recently, not so much now, a fashion in America for boys to be circumcised, and it was believed that it was cleaner or something like that. My understanding is that there is no evidence for this at all. There is no consistent evidence that it prevents premature ejaculation. There is no consistent evidence for any benefits like that to being a cavalier to being a roundhead rather than a cavalier. Skull, AN, skull. So no, I'm not so sure about that. So but anyway, that's where I would see the to come from. Now, if you're new to the Jolly Heretic, I just want to say, as we're about halfway through, please subscribe. YouTube are crushing this channel. I only get about 200 subscribers a month now. They are not, videos don't get recommended, whatever. So it really helps to do that. Please subscribe. Please check if you have subscribed and resubscribe if they have unsubscribed you. We are an online public house, and we meet twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays at 7 p.m. UK time to discuss the kind of science which is, of course, banned in the mainstream and in the newspapers and whatever, and the history as well to a lesser extent. The videos will be taken down. We've got to get to subscribers, precisely. Taken down after this and put on BitChute. Please subscribe over at BitChute. BitChute, of course, being the home of freedom of expression. So please subscribe over there. You can follow me on. You can send in donations if you really want to do so through questions. I'm very grateful for those. Either with Entropy, which you can do even when I'm not online, even when I haven't set up a video. You can always send them in all the time. Or through YouTube, for which I have already set up a video. I prefer through Entropy, but either is of course I'm most grateful either way. But you can support me on that way. You can also buy my books. You can find a link to that in the description. And of course, if you're on Amazon.com, by the way, you can't get them through typing it in. You have to type it in and put books. I don't know why that's happened. And also you can buy a mug, a Jolly Heretic mug. And you will see the link to do so below, perhaps as a Christmas present. Yes, you're quite right. Someone said yes, there's a thing called phimosis, which is when the foreskin is too tight, and those people have to be circumcised. So there are sometimes medical reasons for people being circumcised. So yes, so please do that, and I will answer the questions. And if I don't get round to the questions that you have sent one particular episode, then I will always answer them. I will always answer them either in the following episode or the episode after that. But they will always get answered, and there is, of course, some advantage to the question being answered by delay, because then I can research it in more detail and you will get a superior, better answer. I mean, for example, the thing about taint length. If I'd have tried to answer that question off the top of my head, I've had absolutely no idea. I'd have had to have said so. I had no idea. But fortunately, I saw the question before I went online. I was able to research it, and I was able to, I was able to come up with a fact. Really, really interesting. So yeah, I'm still going on about that. So okay, now the next question comes from a passer on the street, and he says, "What do you think is the most interesting, important consequence of increasing genetic diversity within humans or other species that you haven't mentioned?" It's very hard to say, because I haven't mentioned it, and if I'd have thought of it, then it strikes me that I would have mentioned it. But I suppose one thing I haven't mentioned so much is the obesity epidemic. The obesity epidemic is put down to food. It's put down to the fact that cheap food is bad, unhealthy food is inexpensive, and the healthy food is expensive, and that people don't exercise as much, and whatever. It's put down to these environmental components. But there is a significant genetic component to obesity, and what you would expect as we deviate from the Darwinian norm is more and more people would just put on far too much weight, and more people wouldn't be able to put on any weight at all. There would be this deviation in either direction. And there is some evidence for that you get more and more people that they can't process food in a healthy way. They can't become fat. They're just constantly underweight and anemic. And this is a genetic problem. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if a big part of this obesity epidemic is a genetic problem. It's a manifestation of genes. So yeah. So I think that I haven't discussed that as much, but I think that's a realistic possibility. Okay, Andre says $5. Thank you, sir. Says, during the Middle Ages, the population of Finland was 20,000. France at the same time had a population of 20 million. Till today, the population of Finland has grown by 200 times to 5 million, whereas France only 3 times. Why? Well, I've looked into this, and I think a big part of it was a huge religious revivals that took place in Finland, so that once it became Protestant, and then once it became Lutheran, then they started having much higher fertility, and you had these groups that preached very, very high fertility. So I think Protestantism may actually have been a part of it, whereas Catholicism, although it banned contraception and whatever, wasn't quite so pronatal. So I think that could have been a part of it. I actually contacted a Finnish correspondent about this question to ask what he thought of it, and that's one of the conclusions that we came to. Another one would simply be possibly even just changes in the climate, or France was just closer to its carrying capacity. and also that that Finnish people, got there late. There have been people in Finland, Finnish people in Finland, for less time than the French had been in France, and so of course it took them longer to grow in size and whatever. But once they did so, they started to do so at a much more rapid rate. Anyway, thank you for that question, sir. The next question comes from Edward Jones. European pagan gods are often depicted. Oh, this is an interesting one. He says European pagan gods are often depicted as capricious, cruel, selfish, etc. Why would a religion portray its gods as morally fallible? It seems rather counterintuitive. Yes, it seems counterintuitive, but I don't think it is. Ultimately, the gods have to be paradigms for how you should behave. And if you think about the Christian God, then yes, it is true that the New Testament portrays him as this perfect God who's perfect kindness, perfect love, and whatever. But the Old Testament doesn't. The Old Testament portrays him as cruel, selfish, capricious, and all of these things. And this is good, because it means that under conditions of group selection, you have the ability to draw upon a sacred text which justifies cruel, selfish, capricious behavior, and particularly with regard to members of an out-group or to treacherous members of an in-group. And in order to survive in evolution, you will sometimes need to be cruel, selfish, and capricious, and immoral, basically, particularly to the out-group, but also to members of the in-group who are traitors or who are just a problem for your fitness in some way. You will need to do that. And so what you would expect a religion to do would be to sanctify that which is adaptive, that which is, although the religions which didn't sanctify that which was adaptive, those that sanctified maladaptive things, the people that followed those religions would have died out, would have not passed on their genes. So the fact that these gods are portrayed in these ways would strongly imply that doing so was adaptive to the groups that did so. It is adaptive to be sometimes capricious, cruel, and selfish, and therefore the gods are portrayed in this way to sanctify that kind of behavior as eternally right. And if you think about the nature of Christianity, not the pure Christianity of the New Testament or something like that, but the Christianity that's actually survived, the Christianity as practiced in real life, then that God is not the God of the New Testament. That God is a combination of the God of the New Testament and the God of the Old Testament. And that sanctifies needing sometimes to be cruel, selfish, and nasty, to administer barbaric punishments, to execute criminals, and whatever. It sanctifies all 5 moral foundations rather than just harm avoidance and love and equality. It sanctifies authority and disgust and sanctity and in-group loyalty as well. And that's adaptive. So I would say, although it seems counterintuitive, I would say it is clearly adaptive for gods to be like that. And those are therefore the kinds of gods that have survived. Thank you, Oraz, for your there. Okay, the next question comes from Banana Neptune, and he says, "Hey Ed, if I don't know if you said before, would you consider yourself a high Tory?" Yes, I would. We certainly are a dying breed these days. As I once said to a leftist that was interviewing me, that I'm such a high Tory that you'll get vertigo if you talk to me. I'm such a high Tory you'll get altitude sickness. In England, it's not that you support the Conservative. There's only 2 political parties realistically. If you vote Labour and Conservative, it's a 2-party system, and all you can do is try and push the Conservative Party, I think, in a more sensible direction. Except very occasionally when you get a radical party that manifests itself. And so you tend to identify as a young age with one or the other. And so I have this identification as a Tory, as a Conservative, and it's a traditionalist form of conservatism. And in the 1980s, the kind of conservatism that was extant horrifies them now. I mean, you had groups like the Monday Club that until the early 2000s were attached to the Conservative Party, Enoch Powell, people like that. That kind of conservatism was extant. People that were highly patriotic, highly ethnocentric, possibly negatively ethnocentric, that sort of thing. That kind of Tory. That's what we're talking about here. And so, and those people were also into promoting religiousness and promoting traditional values and basically just promoting adaptation maladaptive ways of living. And so it is that kind of Toryism of which I would be in favour. Yes, half the cabinet is people like Sunak, exactly. And I think those people, says Yehuda Finkelstein, I think those people don't really believe in anything. And so they just want to have power. I don't think that there's anything that motivates them. I don't mind Priti Patel. I think she's said some very interesting things, and therefore they seem to be going for her. Okay, now the next question comes from, which I think is not a particularly good idea, because if you demote somebody, and they're talking at the moment about Boris demoting Priti Patel, that's what Margaret Thatcher did to Geoffrey Howe. She demoted him. Then it's what Tony Blair did to Robin Cook, and they tend to become bitter, and they tend to look for an excuse to resign, and then that can be very damaging. So I wouldn't have thought that was a very good idea to demote her. Okay, the next question comes from Gabriel R. $3. Thank you, sir. He says, could I expect any positive psychological impact from listening to classical music on a daily basis? Been on a kick lately. Yes. Intellectual stimulation pushes IQ to its phenotypic maximum. And I've actually done a video on the issue of what kind of people like what different kinds of music. And so on the one hand, people that are highly intelligent are more likely to have classical music because it is more complicated and thus more intellectually stimulating. But on the other hand, the fact that it is more intellectually stimulating and forces you to think to a greater extent, evokes strong emotions and thoughts about life and whatever, which compel you to think. This will presumably have a positive impact on your IQ and will push your IQ closer to its phenotypic maximum. So I would think that if you're going to listen to a kind of music on a daily basis, then you could do a lot better than listening to classical music. So yes, that perhaps might be rather a good idea, sir. Personally, I'm not a big fan of music, full stop. But if I had to listen, I quite like folk music as well. And interestingly, folk music that was associated with high IQ in the video I did on the subject. Jacko Slab Bass, hello, sir. £3, thank you, sir. The left-wing types I've known through my life have always seemed to have very bad relationships with their parents, especially their mothers. Very Freudian, I know. Any explanation for this? I'm not aware of any data. I'd have to see data that indicated that left-wing people were more likely to have bad relationships with their parents and especially their mothers. But what we do know is that left-wing people are very high in mental instability. Why are left-wing people high in mental instability? Well, because being left-wing is maladaptive, and therefore it's associated with mutation of the mind, and therefore it's associated with other maladaptive things. And one thing that is maladaptive is being left-wing, because being left-wing at the group level is going to be bad for you, and it advocates things like not passing on your genes and these kinds of things. So and having depression and whatever is maladaptive as well. So the two things will likely coexist. Secondly, if people are mentally unstable, this seems to be associated with individualism. Individualism, again, maladaptive to be individualistic. Individualism, manifestation of spiteful mutations, and so is depression. So the two things tend to go together. Thirdly, people that are depressed will tend to believe that life is pointless and life has no meaning and whatever. And if you believe life is pointless and life has no meaning, then you're not going to be particularly enamored by right-wing ideas such as eternity and religion and doing the best for your group and whatever. You're going to be self-indulgent and sad all the time, and everything's pointless. And so life just seems so awful and unfair and terrible for you. And so you can see if that's the kind of negative down person you are, you'll be a sort of a bitter, angry person, and you'll be attracted to just nihilistic things that say let's just destroy everything, or let's just stop all the unfairness because life is so unfair and I feel everything's so unfair because I feel so shit all the time, and therefore you'll be attracted to being left-wing. And so if you are mentally unstable, then mentally unstable people tend not to get on with anybody. They're very on edge, they're very neurotic, they have fundamental low self-esteem, often they'll have borderline personality disorder, which means they'll have a constant fear of sort of abandonment and things like that. And so they'll have problems getting on with everybody, and in particular, and to the extent that the mother is the person that's going to bring them up more and whatever, they're probably going to have quite bad relationships with their mothers. In addition, the heritability of being mentally unstable is very high. And so you would predict that if the left-wing person is mentally unstable, his mother will also be mentally unstable, and therefore she'll be an unpleasant person, and she won't get on. And they won't get on with each other. Also, actually, that's worth noting. Mental instability is high, and mental instability is higher among women. So if you are a leftist, and you're going to not get on with other mentally unstable people, and your mother will be more mentally unstable on average than your father, because women are higher in neuroticism than men. They're more likely to suffer from depression than men. They're more likely to suffer from anxiety than men. And therefore, that's why they overwhelmingly these days seem to, in the absence of religion, which they used to be religious, then they'd be more right-wing because the religion would be conservative. But once they're not religious, they're more left-wing, overwhelmingly so. And so that could be it, actually, to the extent that you're right. The relationship with the mother will be worse than the relationship with the father, because the father will be more mentally stable and thus more emotionally controlled and better able to sort of cope with them, basically. But the mother will herself be more mentally unstable because she's a woman, like, even if you control for everything else. And so therefore you would expect them to get on even worse with their mothers. So I hope that helps answer the question, Mr. Slapbase. Okay, that's a question for Hugh. He's not here anymore, so I won't look at that. Serena JB, hello, madam, says leftist environmental groups don't really care about the environment, or they'd be against open borders and they'd talk about the population explosion in Africa. Well, no, exactly. Of course they don't care about the environment, really. No, of course they don't. What they care about, and there's a study that I've looked at before, they did a video on it, what they care about is obtaining power. And we know this, that is what is associated with being a woke activist, with being a virtue signaler. It is obtaining power. They are Machiavellian, and to a lesser extent, they are narcissistic. And this means that they believe they should have power. They want power. They believe they are special and important and should be praised and should be loved and whatever. And if they are left-wing, then this allows them, in a left-wing environment, in an environment where the left are powerful, it allows them to achieve this. It allows them to achieve their aim of power and whatever. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if it was a conservative environment, the exact same people, well, they would be the church ladies. They would be the right-wing people, because it would be being right-wing and pushing things in a more conservative direction, which would permit you to obtain power and permit you to be liked and to be loved and to be looked up to and whatever. But at the moment, it's an extreme. We're in a left-wing swing where the dominant set of values are these leftist values, as led by the spiteful mutants that are subverting and undermining our culture. And therefore, you are more likely to get power and approval and those things that you desire if you are left-wing, and if you are extreme left-wing, and if you virtue signal about it and whatever. And so, of course, they don't care about it. Of course, they don't care about the poor and believe. Of course, they don't believe that all people are equal. If they believe that all people are equal, why don't they go and live in an area that's overwhelmingly, black? Why do they never seem to live in those areas? Why do they always seem to live in beautiful parts of Surrey or whatever? Why do they move to northern Finland? Why do they if they really think multiculturalism is great, why don't they go and live somewhere that's genuinely multicultural? It's because you should judge people by their actions, not by what they say. And their actions are screaming at you that they don't believe that what they're saying. They don't believe that races are equal. And we know there's a study on that, actually, which found they patronize people that are black more than conservatives do, because they don't believe that these people are intellectually equal at all. Judge people by how they behave. If they really care about the environment, well, why do they go around and on flights and all of these things that they do and using electricity and all this stuff? Why do they go and live in a bloody cave somewhere? Because they don't really believe it. It's a means of signaling and gaining status and gaining power. If they really believe that there shouldn't be immigration, why don't they go and live in an immigrant-dominated area? Because they don't really believe it. If they really believe, and so on, and so if they really believe in equality, why do they send their children to private schools? If they really believe that we should be guilty for the sins of our ancestors, then if they've been to private school, why don't they have a great deal of shame about this? Why don't they? So goodness me, I'm a terribly privileged person, and I shouldn't be allowed to have an opinion. I should check my privilege. They're hypocrites, and so of course they don't care about the environment. If they did, then they would be concerned about the ultimate population of the planet, and the ultimate population of the planet is of course too high, and this is overwhelmingly because of the population explosion that is now happening with the industrialization of Africa. So I think we can dismiss that out of hand. They're just hypocrites of the most appalling order. I met one recently in real life. Again, it's awful meeting. Right, Ronald B. Question on Vietnam. I think we did that one. 99 red pills go by. Did that one. Rachel C. says currently 16 weeks pregnant. Huzzah! Another jolly heretic will still be arriving in the world in April. I think I did that one, but again, congratulations, Rachel. I'm very glad to hear that you're pregnant and there will be a new jolly heretic. Okay, Yehuda Finkelstein, $5, says, how popular is Teemu Selänne in Finland? Teemu Selänne. As a Red Wings fan growing up, I hated his guts playing for a lame team like the Ducks of Anaheim. Is there a genetic marker for fortitude for people like Selänne, who played hockey well into his mid-40s? He's a Finnish hockey player, by the way, for those who aren't familiar with him. International Finnish hockey player, and he is very, very popular here, to answer the question. In fact, I seem to recall last year there was a sort of docudrama about him on Finnish TV or something, and it was extremely popular. It was like massively, massively watched by Finnish standards. So he's something of a hero in Finland. I mean, they love hockey. Young boys in England, when I was at school, I remember the teacher when I was 13 or something asked the class, what do you want to do when you grow up? And about 1/3 of the class wanted to be footballers. 1/3 of the class wanted to be footballers. Even though a lot of those people weren't even in the football A team or B team, still 1/3 wanted to be footballers. And in this country, it's changed now. It's actually a lot of them want to be YouTubers. But to the extent that they want to be sportsmen, they want to be ice hockey players. It's the big thing here. And I've been to a number of ice hockey matches, the Oulun Kärpät. They're rather good, rather masculine sort of thing. You know, you have these dolly birds at various points, 3 of them. These dancing when someone scores a goal or whatever you call it, and stuff like this. It's quite anachronistic in that way. It's quite interesting. But it's a fast-paced game. If you've not been to see a ice hockey match, it's very, very fast paced. There's a great atmosphere. And yeah, I mean, presumably the fact that he was able to keep playing and was physically fit like that up until a relatively old age would, on the one hand, mean that he was, he just had good genes, basically, which permitted him to, he was a healthy, physically healthy person. And also, perhaps that he was perhaps in some ways, a sort of slow life history strategist, meaning that he just aged very slowly, whereas other people would reach their peak ability in something like that at a rather younger age, and then they just wouldn't be as good anymore. I know that in football, with goalkeepers, the goalkeepers tend to last longer. I'm not quite sure why, but they don't have to be as fast, I suppose. But they tend to last longer. But yeah, it's very rare for you to still be able to play at that kind of age. And I'm guessing he's just a slow life history strategist, ages slowly, and so therefore has good genes, very good genes physically, and therefore remains very physically fit into a very old age. We should remember, actually, that in terms of good genes, we know that there were people in the mid-1500s that were 100 years old. But that's documented, and they really were 100 years old. That's not them that they were innumerate and they were just making up their ages. I'm talking highly literate, educated people that were 100 years old. And there's records, they really were 100 years old. And these people would just have been people that were incredible. And think of how appalling the diet was, how appalling the environment was. These people would just have been people that were incredibly genetically fit, and so therefore they were able to live 100 years or whatever. In a book that I did on my collateral ancestor, Sir Piers Dutton, there was someone that testified at a trial about him, and he was said to be 100 years old. And he said, I remember I was 12 years old when Sir Piers Dutton's great grandfather died, or something. That's what he remembered. He remembered he was 12 years old, and he was exactly 12 years old when that person died. So this simply shows you that you can get these people that are just that are mega fit. I'd be interested to know, I haven't looked into it, the sort of life history strategy of Tilana, of this fellow, if there's anything else about him which would be consistent with a slow life history strategy or anything like that, or if it's just that he has very good genes and whatever. But that would certainly, in general, having good genes is associated with a slow life history strategy. So there you go. Okay, the next question comes from Steve Rogers, $5. Thank you very much indeed, sir. And he says, how sensitive this week are autistics and semi-autistics to social epistasis? Are we less affected or just affected in ways that don't affect our baseness? That's a very, very interesting question. I would assume that autistics would be strongly affected by any changes. Well, they are strongly affected by any changes in the environment because they are very, very sensitive to the environment. But then on the other hand, it is not necessarily normal to be autistic, and it is associated with all kinds of other, maladaptive things, left-handedness and whatever. And so they would therefore react differently to these sorts of things. Negative social epistasis tends to involve undermining structure and order and creating chaos. But autistics absolutely hate chaos. And so what I would predict is that, all else being equal, autistic people would oppose those who wish to create chaos and would favor those who wish to create structure. And what negative social epistasis is about creating chaos. So I would expect autistics to be highly insensitive to it because it would be hard to induce them towards chaos. But then on the other hand, autistics would be prone to seeing everything rationally and not believing in God, and therefore they could be, through the negative social epistasis of atheism, induced into things which are atheistic because of their natural atheism. And there was that study that Woodley and his colleagues did, which showed that there was no association between paternal age and atheism in samples born in the 30s, but there was by the time of samples born in the 80s, and this was because these autistics were being, these people, who were old fathers, were being, because of mutant sperm, were being forced to conform, which implies that the social epistasis was working on them and was making them religious, and then the negative social epistasis allowed their natural irreligiousness to come through. And so that would imply that on that measure of religiousness, autistics are adapted to social epistasis, and they can be messed around with by negative social epistasis, because whereby they will start to become atheists and believe that life has no meaning and not want to have children. That would be consistent with that. So are we less affected or just affected in ways that don't affect our baseness? It becomes hard to say. I would say it probably is to do with the relationship between autism and intelligence. It would be highly intelligent autistics that would be rejecting of this chaos, would see through the lies and the nonsense of the dogmas and whatever. But less intelligent autistics perhaps would be induced certainly into atheism, and therefore into negative social epistasis. But that's, as ever, Mr. Rogers, that's a jolly interesting question, and I hope I have done it justice. I would also like to thank Mr. Rogers for a lot of these brilliant thumbnails that we have here on the Jolly Heretic are not from me, they are from Mr. Rogers. And the one which is today's thumbnail, which a lot of you seem to quite like, that is a Mr. Rogers creation as well. So Mr. Rogers is very much the artist, the pub artist here at the Jolly Heretic. So I would like to thank him once again for that. Okay, the next question comes from, sorry, I've got to scroll down. Okay, David, and he says, would group selection theory suggest that societal collapse is a feature, not a bug? Maybe the rising and falling is necessary. Well, yeah, I've just seen that question, but the answer is yes. Group selection theory would suggest that intelligence can't get too high. The group that is too intelligent will create a society of luxury. The society of luxury will make people very low in stress. It will make people therefore rationalize everything, including having children, and therefore they won't be in touch with their religious instincts. They won't want to have children, and they won't have children. And then having children will become an accident and thus associated with stupid people. And that seems to me to be built into the very system of everything, and has happened again and again and again in precisely the same way, whether the society has developed reliable contraception or not, although it's more pronounced in our case because we have developed reliable contraception, whether the society, even though in all of these societies they haven't got this far, they haven't got as extreme as us in terms of feminism or in terms of immigration or in terms of all these other things, but it's still the same process again and again and again with exactly the same markers each time. So I would concur that it is a group selection feature, that the group that becomes too intelligent stops being group selected, and therefore it is selected against by a less intelligent but more group selected, more martial group. And this optimum has to be maintained. You can have what I call a genius strategy, whereby you're relatively low in ethnocentrism and highly intelligent, and therefore you have a large gene pool and you create lots of geniuses and they create brilliant things, and you can dominate people in group selection who are more intelligent and more ethnocentric than you, because you have this genius strategy. But then the religiousness has to be maintained at an optimum level, and the ethnocentrism has to be at an optimum level, and that stops happening once conditions of extreme luxury are reached. People stop being religious, and then that's it. They stop having eternal values. They stop believing life is of eternal importance. They think it's pointless having children. They become nihilistic, and it always goes. So I would say you're quite right. Yes, it is a feature. It is a feature of group selection that the societal collapses must happen. And if they didn't happen, then, as I've said, if we went on getting more and more intelligent forever, then you would just find that the association between intelligence, very, very high intelligence, and autism would be such that the society would just collapse anyway, would just die out, and nobody would want to have children anyway, and nobody would want to have children, and the society wouldn't collapse. And you see this with Mouse Utopia, where it is ensured the society can't collapse. There's basically a God figure who ensures the society can't collapse. He makes sure of it. The society will not collapse. Living Darwinian conditions will not reimpose themselves. And eventually, nobody has children at all, because they're all so intelligent that, if it was this under our system, they'd all be so intelligent that nobody would be having children by accident. And when that happens, they would simply die out. So that's what would happen. If we didn't have the societal collapse and we went on going forever, selecting for intelligence forever, are getting more and more efficient contraception and whatever forever, then eventually nobody would have children and we would simply die out. So it is vital to the survival of humanity that societies rise and fall, that societies go through these cycles of collapse. It is, I say it is built into the very nature of human survival that this must happen. And will happen, and is happening now. We have if you look at Sir John Glubb's analysis of the rise and fall of civilizations, he says all civilizations reach this exact stage now of nihilism, of doubting religion, of low social trust, of immigration, of feminism, even Islam, even Baghdad, of low fertility, of population decline, of valuing sports people and entertainers rather than soldiers as heroes, of just total decadence. And when that happens, the society collapses back into Darwinian conditions. And this is what is happening. And the question is just when. And as I've said, by the end of the century, based on current trends, we will have an average IQ in Britain of 85. and 85 is the average IQ of African Americans, and that is the kind of society that would be produced. But worse than that, because that society is parasitic on a more intelligent society with an IQ of 100 that is surrounding it. But there would be no more intelligent society, perhaps possibly China, but they wouldn't help. So there would be they'd be going down as well. So there would be no more intelligent society. So it really would be 85, and that would be it seems that was about what the IQ was of ancient Greece, maybe it was about 90, something like that. So I think that it's not good. It's not good, but it's in the nature of things, and we will rise again. We will, but we are those people who have been born into a society that's in decline. There's nothing we can do about that, I'm afraid. Okay, David again, thank you, sir, says, are there adaptations that both European humans and animals in Europe both experienced due to the European habitat, or any other examples of cross-species similarity in adaptations? Well, yeah, there's adaptation to the cold. So there are, if you compare species in northern Finland to even a species of tree in northern Finland to humans in northern Finland, then people in northern Finland tend to have short legs, short arms, and a large trunk. And there's evidence that you get this in the kind of animals that survive in an ecology like this: short legs, short arms, large trunk, because that is an adaptation to cold, and it permits you to keep warm, basically. So, and if you go down to somewhere like Africa, long legs, long arms, small trunk, giraffes, things with long legs, and this allows heat to come off. So there are various rules. One of them is Bergman's rule. One of them is Allen's rule. There's various rules on this. If you are adapted to a cold environment, then you will be like this. And if you are adapted to a hot environment, then you will be like this. And that is the case both among humans that are adapted to cold ecologies and among animals that are adapted to cold ecologies. Yeah, so certainly. I mean, those rules follow. So, for example, Finnish people, there's the 2D, normally there's this idea of 2D/4D ratio, and this is the relationship between this finger and this finger, and this is a masculinization marker. The more masculinized you are, then the smaller is that distance. Now, Finnish people, I've argued, are K strategists, so they're not particularly masculinized, but they have quite stubby fingers. They have stubby fingers. They have a low 2D/4D ratio. Why is that the case? Well, it would be an adaptation to cold environment. It keeps the heat in. If you've got more feminine hands, then you've got a large surface area, and the heat can scare. So you can see how this would work. Someone's mentioning taint length. I don't know about the taint length of different animals and how these relate to different ecologies, I'm afraid, although it will be fascinating to look into it. But yeah, so you do absolutely have these sorts of things. With across species that are adapted to cold or adapted to hot. And I mean, that's just those off the top of my head. I'm sure there are others as well. Good. Okay, the next question, get on it, Ed, says Louis Bloom. Okay, get on it. Yes. Okay, the next question comes from $1 Trillion Bill. What was the average IQ of peak classical Greece and Rome? Well, we can base this on the level of per capita innovation. That's the nearest thing I can think of which will allow me to come up with some sort of purchase on what it would be. So, and I think did someone even ask me this question last week, or a similar question? It would be a third of peak. So in 18, we have the same IQ probably now that we had, or at least the same per capita innovation level that we had in about 1600, and that was about 6 important innovations per billion of population per year. And so then we have to ask ourselves, how many important innovations did they have per billion of population per year? So I go into a paper by Hubener, which you will find online, on this matter, and so I think I came up with the answer last time, didn't I? So they seem to have about at the time of ancient Greece, they seem to have about 4 innovations per billion of population per year. So 4 innovations per billion of population per year is now. So the people in Socratic Greece had about the same IQ as now. That's what this implies. They have the same IQ as we have now. And that would probably be consistent with the level of advancement that they got to, which was probably, about the level of the 1600s, I suppose, really, wasn't it? I mean, that was about where they got, or 1700s, just prior to an industrial revolution, but not actually an industrial revolution. That's where they got. And whereas when we got to the industrial revolution, of course, our IQ was much, much, much higher. And we reached a peak in 1870 of, where is it now? In 1870 of 16 major innovations per billion of population per year. So that would imply a much, much, much higher IQ, probably about 30 points higher than now. So, and as for the Romans, one would suspect that they were rather less intelligent than the Greeks. The average seems to be about 3. So, 3. So that is the same as a bit earlier. So they probably had an average IQ of about 90, something like that, about 90. And then compared to now, so they would have had an average IQ that was the same as the average IQ of modern Greece, something of that order. And then it seems to have gone up in the wake of Christianity, and then back down again to an average IQ of about 85, which seems to be the minimum that, by modern standards, which is the minimum that we reached, which lasts from about 350 or 250 AD to about 1200, and then it starts to gradually rise. So I hope that answers the question. Okay, right. I have a number of questions, and I will do those, of course, either next Thursday or next Monday. But I have a very special guest for you on Thursday on the Jolly Heretic, and that is the academic dissident, Dr. Bo Winegard. And so I will see you on Thursday at 7 p.m. UK time, 2 p.m. New York, where we will be talking to Dr. Bo Winegard. And this will now be put on BitChute. Okay, I will see you then. And thank you for tuning into the Jolly Heretic. See you on Thursday. Goodbye.